Welcome back to another exciting episode of Cyber Defense TV. I'm your host and the publisher of Cyber Defense Magazine. It's Gary Malevsky, and guess what? Sitting in my hot seat today is a very special guest. Oliver Sild is the founder and CEO of a very important company, Patchstack. Oliver, welcome. So Patchstack was founded, let me just guess, to deal with the 70 million to 100 million websites out there that are running WordPress. And is that all you focus on, which is not a bad thing, by the way?
Yes, indeed. When we started, we took WordPress as our main focus, really. As right now, it's running around 40% of the web, which is crazy even to think about. And we actually are focused in a way on open source in general. So we are looking at content management systems. So it could be Joomla, Drupal, Magento, and all of their third-party extensions. We specifically focus on the plugins, themes, extensions, and so forth. And right now, the main focus really is the WordPress, as it is the most popular of them all.
What's really interesting is WordPress is reasonably secure if you just install it and get the latest version. It's only had 22 known vulnerabilities. But if you install any plugins of the thousands and thousands of plugins, you've just opened up your website to script kiddies, junior hackers, all the way up to serious cyber criminals and cyber hackers and terrorists. So tell us about this, the good news, bad news on the plugin side, and then where does your company come in to solve this problem?
Yeah, actually, we just recently released a white paper about all the vulnerabilities which kind of came across around WordPress. And the finding was really that 96% of all WordPress related vulnerabilities were from plugins and themes. So this kind of shows you how big of the issue is around the plugins. And indeed, the WordPress core actually has way less vulnerabilities, but the people don't often realize that. And what they feel is that if there is a, let's say, media title about there is a vulnerability about WordPress, right? In most of the cases, it's actually about the plugins in themselves. And from our own statistics, actually, when we look at the data, an average WordPress site has around 23 plugins installed, and 1/3 of them are vulnerable. And also the other third one is actually outdated as well. It is very interesting to look at this issue in general, to see how the open source adoption has become like super popular. And at the same time, it has the community of developers behind it, but it still doesn't have the community of security specialists behind it or security researchers. And what we really do is we build that community of security researchers behind WordPress. So we have created a platform where independent security researchers can submit vulnerabilities about WordPress plugins and themes, and we help them to get exposure for that kind of contribution to the open source when it comes to WordPress. And then we basically make this information free for the public through Patchstack database. But at the same time, we help also the smaller ones, the website owners and developers also, who actually use WordPress for building their websites. And because we already have this database, and because we have this community of researchers who find these vulnerabilities within these plugins and extensions in general, we are able to provide virtual patches for their websites. Basically, our customers who connect their websites to Patchstack, we analyze which third-party plugins, different extensions are installed on their websites, compare those versions to our database. And then if any vulnerability is being found there, we provide automatic virtual patching to those vulnerabilities. So they have the protection from possible attacks against those issues, so they could have time to update these plugins in time.
Oliver, let's talk about virtual patching, because there's some small plugins and then there's some big plugins. WooCommerce has a critical vulnerability I heard recently, which is the most popular e-commerce. It's not even just a plugin, it's a whole system for e-commerce shopping that rides on top of WordPress. What do you do? How do you fix that? What's the virtual patch? Do you find the holes in the source code and you patch it, and then we don't have to wait for WooCommerce to fix it? Or do you send that to them in the parallel? How does virtual patching work?
Yeah, virtual patching actually came out as a term from the IDS and IPS systems as a kind of fast and temporary solution for kind of fixing the vulnerability within a very specific version of, let's say, library. And we really had like few options in our hands. Like one of the way how to do patching is to literally change the code on the vulnerable let's say, library. But the issue with that is that you need to have versioning, and you also need to have some sort of integrity on the files and so forth. And the other thing is, of course, WordPress specific, is that everybody is afraid of even updating the plugins because they're afraid of the site breaking down. Imagine someone from the third-party provider changing the code on your website on your behalf. So that didn't work out. And we didn't even go and try that, to be honest. And the other way was just to have regular WAF filters for preventing the malicious attacks, or like just filtering to traffic, basically. And we have the combination of those in terms of having the information about the libraries which are installed into the website. And then basically we create virtual patches at the same time as we put new vulnerabilities into our database. And those virtual patches are basically like a small modules of multiple firewall rules that say which function within, let's say this plugin is vulnerable. And if someone is trying to send a request against this function, then, basically the firewall is blocking it. So this allows us to provide like this virtual patch without actually changing any line of code on the website, which makes it usable for the average WordPress user, which was a very important goal for us.
So Oliver, are you standalone, or are you sending a rule to the WAF? For example, a very popular firewall that people get is WordFence, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm running WordFence on my WordPress, it's a built-in firewall. Though I recommend to people, get a CDN like Cloudflare or others and do everything you can to defend against DDoS attacks, and filtering. If you can get a WAF that runs in front of or in the cloud, not inside your WordPress, you're not going to eat up CPU cycles of your Apache server. But people do it. People say, hey, I can quickly get a firewall running. Do you, and I like your idea, if I had a SQL injection attack, you're just going to defend against that minor, it's a major issue, but it's a minor attack, a tiny spot in my server. Do you work with WordFence? Do you work with other firewalls? Are you a mini WAF? How does it operate?
Yeah, we actually work with other security vendors as well. So we provide an access to the database, which they can use to, generate their own rules. But we work very similarly to WordFence, and there is a reason why you install it as a plugin, because we talk about 40% of the web, and this 40%, most of them only know how to install plugins. If you try to ask them to spin up a CDN firewall or a DNS-based firewall, or have some server instance running or with the firewall for you, or these kind of things, if they hear about these technical terms, even they rather not deal with it, and that's a problem. So it has to be super.
Sorry to interrupt. They're web developers, and they're not source code writers, and they see a plugin that says this gizmo does magic. It pops up, sign up, subscribe to my email, or it lays out the form better, or it's a whole e-commerce plugin. They see the reviews. There's 872 people who downloaded this plugin, or 8,720, and they love it. 5-star review, install, and it could be totally crappy code, even though it works.
Yeah, and they never know actually if the guy who wrote that plugin, if maybe he just copied everything together from a Stack Overflow. He doesn't know. We actually have done testing of looking at some of the very popular PHP functions which are copied from the Stack Overflow, which are actually vulnerable. And when you analyze the WordPress, plugins repository, you can actually find plugins which have all the same function, all the same line of code copied to the plugin, and that renders the plugins vulnerable. Some of them have hundreds of thousands of installations. So the impact is really big.
So are you designed just for SMBs? Are you finding some mid-market to maybe even Fortune 1000 companies are using WordPress? Who's using WordPress? As you said, 40% of the web servers worldwide now. Does that mean, but is it still the small market, the mid-market? Where do you fit? Where does WordPress fit and where do you fit?
I'd say WordPress itself has fit now, pretty much everywhere. If we look at e-commerce, as you said, WooCommerce, for example, is getting more and more popular as well. WordPress itself is getting more popular, and it's not anymore as a blogging platform as it used to be. With the upcoming update, you're going to have full site editing that is being rolled out, which basically makes it similar to how people have been using page builders, and basically it's made it even more simpler to roll up a website that can be used to present your business, or even you can run media outlets on that and whatever. So we've seen a lot of, I think there's even statistics about the usage of WordPress in the Fortune 500 companies, and it's also fairly big. I don't remember the exact percentage right now, but yeah, it has eaten its way up to everywhere at this point, and I can only see it continue growing at this point.
So you said you've got a couple methods to solve a highly vulnerable, exploitable plugin that I accidentally installed. Got it in my WordPress. I don't know. I trusted the developer. I even paid the developer, and I get annual support. And my whiz-bang plugin's doing something important, or it's a whole e-commerce platform. And you have a whole team worldwide crowdsourcing let's have best practices in source code. Let's find the holes, see where the source code went wrong, because all the plugins are open. The cool part of plugins is you can read the code.
Yeah. Like in our case, what we call Patchstack Red Team, which is basically like a community of independent security researchers. So we have created let's call it gamified bug bounty or bug hunting platform. I don't want to call it bug bounty because we are not actually having the similar system of others where you pay per finding or per se. Because in WordPress, for example, if you would only pay per finding, then only the big projects or the big plugins, let's call them this way, would get audited because only them have the money to actually pay for the bounties. So we removed that part from there, and instead we created a gamified platform where if researchers find vulnerabilities within let's say plugin with 100,000 installations, we actually multiply that with the CVSS score, and then we can say how much score this researcher got, and over the period of a whole month they would basically get a monthly score on a leaderboard, and then we are paying payouts based on from top to the bottom. And the companies who actually use our database and companies who are using our product basically contribute into this prize pool. So the researchers get paid for contributing into the security of the open source. So that's what we also plan to expand out of WordPress to other open source platforms as well.
That's an exciting business model. You take the common vulnerability scoring system, it's a serious or critical or high vulnerability. It's scored high. Let's just pretend we're using FICO scores. Someone who has a really bad FICO score in America, they can't get a credit card. So if you have a really bad hole, your CVSS score is pretty high. And so the more a developer finds and fixes high CVSS scored vulnerabilities, the higher up they are on your leaderboard, and then they win their prize. And I'm assuming maybe even cash and notoriety.
Yes, we have cash prizes for the researchers. So the researchers actually find vulnerabilities in third-party plugins. So because WordPress plugins all are open source, our platform automatically fetches the information about these third-party plugins. And then if a researcher finds vulnerability in there, reports it to us, we manage the triage process for them. We report it to the developer, help the developer to fix this vulnerability. But eventually the researcher who does the job to find and pinpoint these vulnerabilities is getting cash prizes.
Go ahead.
And this actually, what is very cool about this is that this allows us to keep the most updated database of vulnerabilities in the WordPress ecosystem, and it is completely free for everyone to look. Just go to patchstack.com/database. You can see all the vulnerabilities. And at the same time, this allows us to protect the customers first, as all the vulnerabilities that being, reported to us and what we actually put into the database later on after the plugin developers has fixed these issues, we can already provide virtual patches to all our customers. And we are working together with hosting companies with that.
That's great. So Oliver, does Patchstack validate the findings of a third party, one of these gamified source code gurus? You validate it before you put out the fix or the firewall rule?
Yeah, so we validate all the vulnerabilities that are reported by the Patchstack Red team internally. And so we look if the vulnerability is valid, and then we also make sure that it's responsibility disclosure to the plugins developer. And we also do patch validation. We check that once we report this vulnerability to the developer and say there was a researcher who found the vulnerability in your plugin, then we make sure also that the fixes that the plugin developer then applies to his plugin are also valid. And then we have this period of time where we wait and see if the plugin developer releases the fixed version. Then we also monitor that most of the users would have updated the plugin already to the fixed version and so forth. And then the information would be put up into the database, to Patchstack database. And somewhere in the middle, when we see that there is already a threat to our customer site, we can actually already protect them with virtual patches, because we are in the very middle of reporting the vulnerabilities and fixing the vulnerabilities from the developer side. And we are the source of information for the vulnerabilities themselves. We are able to protect our customers really fast, even sometimes before the vulnerability comes public.
So Patchstack, I'm guessing, is a plugin, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a secure plugin that does some patching and WAFing and firewall rules and all that good stuff. When we get plugged in with you, let's say we're an e-commerce site and we've got 100,000 credit card records, and we're trying to manage them right with encryption and all that. The WordPress by default isn't very secure, and it uses MySQL, and call it a plain text database. It's not encrypted. How do you keep yourself out of the compliance area or the risk that, how do I know that Patchstack doesn't eavesdrop or have a back door that's affecting my GLBA or my PCI or my HIPAA or whatever the regulation is?
Yeah, so one of the things with what we do is that we don't really collect any personal data because that's not something that we are interested of in general. So one of the things is that when you install Patchstack to the application, the only thing that we look into is the vulnerable or like the versions of the components that you have installed, plugins, themes, WordPress core, maybe PHP version, whatever is the hosting environment where the site is hosted, giving to us. And then we just reply with the virtual patches. And that's pretty much all that we do. We don't direct your traffic through our servers. Everything is happening on your site and you control your own information. So, and of course, external audits that we do for our own product, and especially we also have our own community of penetration testers and ethical hackers, so it's obvious that our plugin is also in front of them.
You eat your own cooking. So here's a couple more hot seat questions. I've plugged in Patchstack, it's up and running. How quick do you get results to me, and can anybody afford you? How do, like how fast is it deployed, and what's the price point? Is it just for large companies?
We are trying to, why we approached in the first place is because of its popularity. If we want to make a value out of that, we need to address WordPress also as the whole. Our product is actually very, reasonably priced. We only price per website per month. The pricing itself is very straightforward. It's volume-based pricing. If you, let's say, have an e-commerce site, you pay $14.99, which is not much for a security project per month. Yeah.
That's great pricing for what you do.
Yes, and then basically all you need to do is install the WordPress plugin basically for your WordPress site that connects Patchstack with your website, and then the information is getting sent to about the plugin versions and all that sent to Patchstack, and Patchstack just replies with the virtual patches. And let's say if there's any vulnerabilities that are found by our security community, or if there's any vulnerabilities found anywhere else, and you get these notifications and you also get the virtual patches. So it's very straightforward.
Now, maybe my last question. A lot of people have, like you say, 27 plugins. You log into your WordPress and once a week or twice a week, there's an update. Is that because of you guys driving those developers crazy, or are they constantly tweaking their code because there's so many updates? And then how do you know that update is secure or not? It seems like we must have Patchstack, and you're going to see that update got auto-updated. That patch got put in for one of the plugins, and now it's a newly vulnerable one, or maybe it's a more secure one. How do we know?
Indeed, it's very hard to know at this point. The plugins are getting updated all the time, as behind each plugin is often a separate company who is trying to push new, and they have a lot of users who want new features and so forth. They just continuously develop their plugins further. The updates are very common to have on WordPress sites. Probably if you have 20 plugins or so, probably that doesn't take over 2 days to have at least 3 of them outdated already. In an ideal world, auto updates should be turned on. But what we saw is that when WordPress core released the new functionality of being able to turn on the auto updates, the very first blog posts in all different kind of search, I think it was Search Engine Journal and different outlets, the first thing that everyone said was how to turn off these auto updates, because everyone is so afraid of the websites breaking down. Because
Oliver, isn't that fragile? Because there's thousands of updates per year, but will it really break your WordPress site if one of your 27 plugins has some new code?
A lot of the updates can break this website down, but at the same time, do you want to have your website broken down for a minute after the update, which you can revert, or would you want to have the website to be completely taken over by someone and maybe the whole traffic is being redirected somewhere else? And if you have an e-commerce store, you don't probably want to wake up in the knowledge that the credit card information of your kind of customers have been basically stolen or eavesdropped. And it is which side you choose in a way, but I would still suggest people to keep the number of plugins as low as possible, choose your stack really wisely, try to look into more popular plugins in a way, as they have had already more kind of attention on the security as well. And yeah, really try to use as few plugins as possible. That's really the kind of best kind of tips to give in that terms. And of course, even then, you would need to know if there is, any vulnerabilities found in any of the plugins that you use.
Okay, I'm going to give you an idea. Don't forget about us little guys. Why can't all my plugins stay Patchstack certified before I install them? and refuse to install those that aren't Patchstack certified.
We haven't just got them there yet, but we'll do so. We already have ideas of actually plugin developers who are interested in having their plugins audited. We actually have an option for them to add their plugins into Patchstack Red Team in front of the community as a featured plugin. And with that, they actually get the badge which says that their plugins are being externally audited for security. And as being on the featured list, they would obviously get more attention from the researchers. So they would also get more vulnerabilities fixed, which is actually a good thing as well, which is the main thing really. And then as well, the researchers get 10% more score for finding vulnerabilities in their plugins. So again, this little gamification touch, which makes researchers more eager to find vulnerabilities within these plugin developers' specific plugins, and allows them to fix the vulnerabilities before any bad guys found them.
So
yeah.
Patchstack, affordable, easily deployed, always up to date, keeping an eye on the latest and greatest, the most vulnerable, most important plugins for WordPress. And I'm sure WordPress itself, making sure we've got the right deployment, the right version, and we're secure. Oliver, is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners that we didn't cover?
Yes, because one of the things that we are very focused of is building the community behind that. Because what we see is that in the WordPress, there is a very strong community of developers. The developers who have built like thousands, tens of thousands of plugins. But at the same time, we think the time is really now to build the same strong community of security experts behind WordPress as well. So basically any company who is working and kind of serving the WordPress ecosystem, let's call it like that, are very welcome to come and really just support the initiative, to contribute into the Red Team project, to contribute into the community. And together we can, I think, make WordPress way more secure than it is right now.
That sounds great. So we can have at least 40% of the websites in the world have a direction to go, which would be patchstack.com. And you can even go /database and check out the vulnerabilities and the patches and fixes. Sounds like a wonderful initiative, really great project. Pricing sounds awesome. Oliver Sild, you are the founder and CEO of Patchstack, patchstack.com. You made it through my hot seat. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.
Thanks for having me.
And folks, don't forget, come back next time for another exciting episode of Cyber Defense TV.